What's going on, everybody? I am back. Episode number 215 of the Club and Sub podcast. Tonight, we're going to be chatting UFC Vegas 105, headlined by Josh Emmett taking on Lerone Murphy. Lags is currently experiencing some technical difficulties. If he can get through, I'm going to add him in here. So we'll see. But until then, not going to keep you guys waiting. Going to go live with it, see what happens. We'll talk about last night real quick. But guys, before I do that, as usual, if you like the show, drop a like, subscribe. I'd appreciate it. Lags would appreciate it. It'll give us a reason to add some more shows this year. Sorry, I'm just messaging Lags. But yeah, so last night we had Mexico City, Moreno, Urseg. It was really a frustrating card for me. I lost 3.92 units. I'll just go through my slate as we did here. I had Steven Urseg for a unit of plus 220. I don't really feel bad about the bet. It was a pretty competitive fight. You know, Urseg outlanded him on the numbers by like 35 significant strikes. I didn't have much of an issue with the decision. I thought it was competitive. I didn't think Urseg pulled the trigger on his right hand enough. He seemed to get spooked about sitting down on power shots after the first round when Moreno landed on him hard a few times. But, I mean, it was a competitive fight. I don't really have an issue with it. I had 2 units, Drew Dober, plus 106. That sucked. I could say win condition, and to a degree, it was win condition being hit there for Torres. At the same time, I didn't love how Dober was looking speed-wise prior to the KO. Hard to take much from it, but I think his durability is clearly pretty gone at this point. So I don't think it was a particularly good bet. I had a unit on Carlos Vergara plus 175. That sucked. I think Vergara, that was a bad bet. Vergara's chin's just dust now. I thought, maybe too much was being put into the Tamarov knockdowns, but, he got wobbled all over the place and then submitted. I had 2 units on Austin Hubbard plus 180. That was infuriating. And it was really the difference between a profitable night and not profitable for me, which really kind of sucks because, look, I think you can make an argument that Hubbard won that fight. I wouldn't say that I have any issue with the decision. I don't. I just feel like he had a minus 200 path there and he kind of just botched it on IQ, grappled Medeiros easily for all of round 2. Round 3 got him down, was able to control him for 3 minutes. He probably could have just continued to chill in half guard and just wrestle him, but tried to jump for the back, ended up being a bad decision, ended up on bottom, ate a couple elbows in the front headlock series, lost the decision. I think it was a very good bet. I think he looked like a favorite in my opinion, but them's the breaks, as they say. So that sucked. I had a parlay at minus 146, Raul Rosas and Jamal Emmers. That hit. I had 2.19 units on that, so it hit for a unit and a half. Emmers, of course, God forbid anything be sweat-free, gets taken down and almost gives up a sub in the first 30 seconds of the fight. But once he extricated himself from that, he ran over Miranda like he should. And then I also had 0.25 units on Emmers KO round 1 plus 330, 0.25 units on Emmers KO round 2 plus 500. Obviously, the KO round 1 hit for 0.8 units, and the round 2 lost. So, yeah, frustrating, really frustrating night. My biggest takeaway from it, and the real spot I regret is just Dober checked a lot of boxes, but, betting on these aging guys taking on huge hitters is – pretty, yeah. I mean, Liam just pointed it out. Like they literally, his coaches just wanted him to just wrestle him. That's all he was. That's really all he was doing. Like, that's all Hubbard had to do was just keep wrestling him. Even if Medeiros gets up in that position, it was pretty clear Hubbard could have just locked his hands, pushed him back to the fence, and held him there. Like it was very clear Medeiros had no real way to extricate himself from any kind of grappling transitions. So, yeah. Frustrating night, incredibly frustrating fight that was. But we move on. Interesting card here, 13 fight slate. Good headliner with Josh Emmett taking on Lerone Murphy. Excited to break it down with you guys. If you guys have any questions in the chat, any comments, fire them in here. I'll throw them up on the big screen. But we got to start with the first fight of the night. Lomaboomy taking on Estela Nunez. Lomaboomy, a gigantic favorite here. She is currently priced at minus 650. Comeback on Nunez is plus 475. I feel the price is probably pretty wide, if for no other reason than, while they're fresh and at distance, Nunez should compete. She's a pretty good boxer, fast hands, has a fair amount of power for a female fighter. Lomaboomy, not much of a boxing threat herself. Even in the striking in general, like Lomaboomy is a really nice Muay Thai practitioner, really nice clinch knees and elbows. She's actually, improved her top game a bit. So when she hits trips out of there, she can have a lot of effectiveness. But as a boxer, I don't think she offers, a terribly much. So like I kind of expect Nunez to compete early here. Having said that, I have two big questions here. One, is Nunez going to be able to stop the trips from Loma? Because if she can't, I feel like Loma can probably just control her pretty easily. Which is a problem, obviously. And then number two, is she going to be able to handle, Loma's pace? Because Nunez has shown us now multiple times she's got about 7 minutes of gas, and then it all goes to shit. Loma, she doesn't push a pace in terms of striking pace, but she does force the clinch over and over and over again, which is arguably more exhausting than a heavy striking pace. So I think it really comes down to how you assess, Nunez's chances to finish this fight early or steal around on the back end. I don't feel great about them. I do think the line's a bit on the wide side, but I think she is very liable to get broken in this fight. It's something I'll look at if it's, available is, if we get like a big, like plus 2,000 or something, maybe on Nunez KO1, I think I might be interested in that because she has hurt several women. She obviously has a few KOs in her career. I feel, this could be that kind of spot, like a sneaky prop here that no one's looking at. But I don't really have any interest in going in on a Nunez money line pre at 475, especially at 6-5. We don't know what she's up to. Hasn't fought in a minute. Had a major injury her last time out there. But yeah, I think the line's a bit wide. Maybe Nunez KO1. Other than that, no interest. Moving on, we got Vanessa Demopoulos. She's taking on Toledo Alencar. Current price, Alencar minus 118, Demopoulos minus 102. I took a little Alencar as a dog, I think in the plus 130 range, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. I think the line could be a tad bit wider than where it is right now. When I'm looking at the fight, I look at like, what does Demopoulos really have that's a plus skill? And to me, her only real plus skill is tenacity. She's a terrible distance striker, technically. Liam makes a good point about never bidding a shrimper in Vegas. She's a good distance. she's a terrible distance striker. She gets outlanded by 3 significant strikes per minute at distance for her career. Bad defense. She's a terrible wrestler, easy to take down. She's got, I don't even know if I want to call it slick jiu-jitsu, but she does have some jiu-jitsu threats she'll present to you on the ground. But, I don't think many good grapplers have many issues dealing with that from her. Now, the biggest thing she's got going for her is just tenacity and durability. And, even when she's grounded, you see her throw tons and tons and tons of elbows off her back. She's always working, which always helps. And you can see it because the judges love her. I would make the argument, Liam said he's made tons of units off of her. I would make the argument that Vanessa Demopoulos has won at least 3 fights that she shouldn't have gotten on the cards. But she gets them because she's very tough. She doesn't really show her, but she has a great poker face. She presses forward, and she's always doing stuff. She's taken on Toledo Alencar here, and Alencar, I'd almost argue in some respects, is the opposite way. It's one of the concerns and why I would never recommend going big on a spot like this. But Alencar, we've seen her gas out in fights before. Doesn't push much of a pace on the feet. Has similar hitability issues to Demopoulos. And so in that respect, I think it's fair to want to back the Demopoulos side of this fight. Having said that, though, Demopoulos can't really wrestle at all. And Toledo Alencar, her game, the top part of her game is her grappling. She's going to get Demopoulos down if she wants her there. On the mat, Alencar is a 6-time IBJJF world champion in jiu-jitsu. She's a very good jiu-jitsu player. I have a really hard time seeing Demopoulos really threatening her with the jiu-jitsu. Having said that, one of the reasons I'm kind of bullish on Alencar on top too is unlike, say, Kanako Murata, who basically just stayed in full guard and kind of let Demopoulos win minutes off of her back. Alencar will look to pass the dominant positions. And like, if you can get past Vanessa's guard, she doesn't really have a lot that she can offer off of her back. And so I feel like Alencar should be able to get her down easy and should be able to get the dominant positions. The big question here is cardio. Can Alencar do that for 15 minutes? I'm not 100% sure, but what I will say is I feel like the Luciano fight, which is obviously the one that everybody comes back to because just how horrible her optics were in round 3 of that fight, is a bit overstated because Luciano is a giant for the weight class. She's very, very physical, and she kept getting up. Alencar attempted 21 takedowns there. Alencar's not going to attempt 21 takedowns here. Like she'll get Vanessa down probably like 3 or 4 times off probably 6 or 7 takedowns. So, and if she can pass, I don't know that she's going to have to work that hard. But yeah, I mean, look, it's a sweaty fight. I don't think this is like Alencar domination necessarily by any means. And if Vanessa can make her work, yeah, I like this angle a lot that Liam has because I think the Alencar sub is pretty live. Like I think Vanessa has been fortunate not to have been sub more than she has in her career, even though you could make the argument that last sub was kind of cheating on the Amarin part, or not even make the argument it was. But I do think Alencar's got a real shot to sub her, and even if it gets sweaty late, I feel rounds are going to be really close here. You know, Alencar's going to get top time. You know, Vanessa's won a bunch of close decisions, but, you know, Hound said it in the chat, you know, it's always slim margins. So if I think Alencar is going to win the early portion of the fight semi-convincingly with a chance to sub, and I think rounds otherwise will be close, I think you got to have her out in like the minus 150 range personally. So yeah, I like the Alencar side here for a little bit. Not too passionate. I mean, it is 2 tiny women fighting in a cage. What could go wrong? But up next, we got Victor Henry. He's taking on Pedro Falcao. Current price, Victor Henry minus 205. The comeback on Falcao plus 175. I don't have a super strong opinion on this yet. I am kind of leaning the Falcao side. I think he is, you know, pretty physical, pretty tenacious, pretty good grappler. Obviously, in Victor Henry, you're getting a guy that's lots more experienced here, throws a ton of volume, great cardio, you know, won't go away. He's seeing everything. He's not going to get daunted by anything that happens to him in there. But with Falcao, I think, you know, Henry's 38 years old. Falcao's 30. I think Falcao's a bit more physical. And even though I'd favor Henry fairly strong on the feet, I feel like the bigger shots are going to come from the Falcao side in this fight. So I wouldn't be shocked if Falcao competed a bit there. I'm a bit skeptical if Falcao can sub Henry. I know he got subbed last fight, but Henry, obviously historically very, very good defensive jiu-jitsu. I think it's, yeah, that's a fair point. Liam said if you're getting subbed by Jordan, you get subbed by Falcao. That's definitely true. I feel like Henry just fought incredibly dumb versus Jordan, but yeah, I wouldn't expect it to happen. I mean, it could happen, but I do think you have the younger fighter in Falcao, who's also the better athlete with the more powerful hands, who probably has most of the grappling upside here. Like the biggest edge on Henry's side here is, you know, work rate, experience, and cardio. But I don't know. I feel like, I don't want to call it a changing of the guard spot, but I feel as if Henry could be going into the decline pretty quickly here. Like this is a 38-year-old guy who doesn't have a lot of horsepower and isn't a great wrestler. And like he relies on basically being able to volume guys. Like those kind of guys don't age well, like at all. And Henry's already aged better than you would have expected him to. So if he's starting to turn over here, I wouldn't be shocked. I kind of think Falcao is the side. I got to do a little bit more tape on it, but I just feel like the grappling and physicality of Falcao alone is likely enough for the line to feel a bit on the wide side to me. Moving on, we have got Reese McKe taking on Daniel Frenza. This is going to be a banger for as long as it lasts. Frenza minus 155. The comeback on McKe plus 135. I'm contemplating a McKe play here. I guess to some degree, I understand why McKe or Frenza is a favorite. You know, McKe is a southpaw, fast hands, pretty good power, decent counter game. He's pretty sharp. And obviously Reese McKe, you know, Skeletor as they call him, very hittable. Stands straight up with his chin in the air. He's aggressive, so it should be punishable by a counter striker like Frenza. But having said that, I do think it's not that straightforward for Frenza because McKe isn't going to let Frenza sit back and have like a pretty fight. He's a guy that's going to come for you and be very aggressive, throw a lot of output at you. And I think Frenza should find, a home for his left a fair amount in this fight. Maybe even wobble McKe a few times here. But I just get this feeling that McKe is going to overwhelm him a bit. Frenza, he wants a pretty fight where he can sit back, pick his shots well. McKe's not going to give him that. He's much more of a dog. I think I like McKe's clinching and his grappling in general a bit more than I like Frenza's. I feel like his cardio is a bit better than Frenza's. And obviously McKe is the more experienced fighter here. He's got some UFC fights. Yeah, I know it was an ugly fight, but, McKe just went to a split decision with Chidi Njokuani. He fought Angelusa pretty competitively in that fight. Now, he lost that fight because of the optics of Lusa landing huge shots, and that could happen here, or he could even get KO'd here. But I feel like Frenza has not been involved in a dogfight yet in the way he's going to be with Rhys McKe here. So I don't know. I was hoping for a wider line than this. It was a bit wider last week, but I am thinking about McKe because I just feel he's reliable to push a really high work rate. We've seen him fight really, really tight with other fighters prior to this. I mean, Frenz is making his debut. He didn't look particularly good in his Contender Series fight before his opponent gassed out. And other than that, his best win is Harris Talunzik. Yeah, I mean, give me McKe. He'll be the pick. I am kind of leaning that direction. I am hoping that maybe this moves to like McKe 150, 160. But I do think he should fight. This should be a pretty competitive fight. Likely a really, really fun fight, too. Moving on, we got Deone Barbosa taking on Diana Belida. Going to keep this one very short, very sweet. Barbosa is way, 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 way better than Diana Belida in the grappling. She should be able to get her down very quickly. When she has her there, she should be able to more or less maul on the mat. Big question really just comes down to if you think she's going to sub her or not, in my opinion. I suppose you could make a case for Belida making big improvements here, maybe keeping it upright a bit or working up a bit, but I don't really see it. Belida doesn't seem like a particularly serious fighter to me. And I was talking with Dogfather earlier today, and he made a good point. Like, if Molly McCann is subbing you, how much scope do you really have to win the grappling against Deone Barbosa? And the answer is not a lot. I think this is probably it for Belida. She's going to get her pink slip here. Question is going to be, can you get a decent price on the Barbosa sub? I kind of doubt it. It's probably going to be priced into the line. I unironically think minus 500 is probably value. Like, it's always, no one ever wants to lay a price like that. But I feel legitimately that like Barbosa is about 88% here, maybe even a bit north of that. Belida needs is in like banana peel territory. So we'll see. I was actually looking at, I'll talk about the fight earlier, maybe throwing it in a parlay. We'll see. I haven't decided yet. I don't love parlaying shit, but I also don't really want to lay just a straight minus 500. So I don't know. Moving on though, Dangerous Davy Grant. He's coming back again, dude. Absolute legend. 14-7. He is taking on Daniel Santos. Grant now 39 years old. He's getting up there. We keep waiting for the wheels to fall off with Davy, but last time out there, he kind of beat up Ramon Tavvaris a bit on the feet. Surprised a lot of people there. Looks like he's still kicking just fine. Every time people count him out, he puts in a performance like the Daniel Marcos one or the one last fight. And now he's getting Willie Cat, Daniel Santos, who's coming off a 2.5-year layoff. And I'm not even really sure what the layoff's for. Current price, Willie Cat's minus 160. The comeback on Davy is plus 140. It's an odd fight because Santos does a ton of stuff I like, and Santos does a lot of stuff I don't like as well. He's very, very hittable, relentlessly aggressive, which is awesome. Throws a ton of strikes, which is awesome. I actually think he's a pretty good grappler. He's a very good get-up game, solid defensive grappler, decent wrestler, decent jiu-jitsu. On the Davy side, Davy, you're going to get good leg kicker, decent footwork, good off the counter, decent wrestler, but not great. Chin is, I don't even know. Like, I'm always tempted to call Davy fragile because of how many times the guy's gotten dropped in the UFC, but he's never been knocked out somehow. Through all of that, through all the times he's been hurt or knocked down, he's never been knocked out, which I suppose is an argument that perhaps it's due to happen, and maybe that is the case. But this is an interesting fight. And a year or two ago, probably even a little more than that, I'd have wanted to bet Davy here just because I feel like he could have just out footworked. Santos kept him guessing and just outpointed him in a big way. But here, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I feel like Davey can win this fight. I don't think he's a worse striker than Santos. I think he could hurt Santos. But at, at 39, the downside is just gigantic at this point, especially with how often he's been hurt in recent years. Santos, not a guy who's going to let him breathe either. He's going to be on him. He's going to force a brawl. I watch back, Santos's, loss to Julio Arce, and I just feel like Davey no longer has the speed or sharpness to really implement that kind of game plan. So he's going to end up stuck in a war in all likelihood. And in a war, I just think Santos, I think he's more durable. I think Santos might still be improving, whereas Grant is almost certainly regressing at this point. And I ultimately think the floor on Grant is just so low here. Like, you could sell me on Grant looking minus 130, minus 140, but you could also tell me Grant shows up, looks deteriorated, and Santos looks minus 500, right? With that kind of dynamic, it's just like I can't get to the Davey side. My gut, and I think I've said this in like Grant's last 3 fights, and it hasn't happened yet. My gut is that Grant's going to get knocked out here, but we'll see. And yeah, this is 6hound just said it in the chat. Like, this is a big thing for me. I thought Grant looked horrible against the Sunsao, and like, Rafael Sunsao had been shot for about 3 years by the time that fight happened. And he was 30 seconds from losing that fight. I also sort of think Santos low-key could come out here, land 4 or 5 takedowns, and win the fight that way. I think he's got better cardio at this point. So, yeah, I think Santos, more ways to win, younger, more durable, more dangerous. I don't know if I'll get there at minus 160 just because I hate laying it on guys that are as aggressive and vulnerable as Daniel Santos is, but I'm considering it, so we'll see. Moving on, though, we got a great fight here. Another banger. Actually, a lot of low-key bangers on this card. Luis Gerule taking on Ode Osborne. Current price, Gerule minus 210. The comeback on Osborne, plus 180. Gerule coming off a really fun Contender Series win against Nick Piccinini. Very, very impressive fighter to me. And by impressive, there's a lot of stuff, I think, a lot of holes he has. He is hittable. I think he can be wrestled a bit. But the man knows what he's good at, which is being durable, having great cardio, and pushing a pace. Does a ton of attritional work. He's a decent counter grappler, can work up okay, and he just won't stop coming forward until you put him down. And that's really a great style to have, in the UFC. It's just being a guy who pushes a high pace, who can take shots, and has great cardio. Conversely, he's fighting Ode Osborne here, who is almost the exact opposite. Ode, tall, long for the division, hits super hard for the division, very, very fast and explosive striker. Ode, a lot of great tools, but Ode has those great tools for about 7 or 8 minutes, sometimes even longer than that. But eventually with Ode, when the wheels, when things go a little bit sideways, the wheels completely fall off. If you put this guy on the mat, he has terrible IQ. He has terrible IQ on the feet. He seems to deal horribly with adversity. So, yeah, Ode is just a really hard guy to get behind at this point in his career. Having said that, I look at this fight, and I do think Ode is going to land heavy early here. If you told me he knocked out, gave Gerule his first KO loss this weekend, I wouldn't be shocked at all because I think he's going to find a home for the left over and over. And I kind of think, Southpaw could cause Gerule a bit of issues. The problem is, I don't see how you can bet Ode in this dynamic. Maybe a shot at a KO1 or something. But I don't want to say certain, but I feel fairly confident that if Gerule can kind of work his way into the fight and clear the first, few minutes, the attritional work he does and the pressure is eventually going to break Ode here. I guess the way I look at it is like, while I favor Ode in round 1, I favor Gerule far more in round 3 than I do Ode in round 1. And I think even in round 2, I would make Gerule a moderate favorite. I just have no faith at this point in Ode's career that he can stand up to pressure for 3 straight rounds. His best case scenario, if he doesn't find an early finish here, is probably the Charles Johnson fight, where maybe Gerule gets a bit tired and it's a grimy fight where maybe Ode can land a opportunistic takedown or 2 and win a super tight decision. But I don't really think that's that high percentage. And even in thinking about, what Ode KO early is here, I have a hard time putting it past 15%. So yeah, I think Gerule, moderate favorite, makes sense. I think he's going to probably have a long UFC career. So excited about this fight, though. It should be really fun for as long as it lasts. Moving on, we got Robert Valentine taking on Torres Finny. Valentine coming off a loss in his debut to Ryan Loder. That fight was electric. Valentine got an early back take, almost subbed him. Loader recovered, took him down and smashed him. Therese Finny, guy is a wildebeest. 5'8" bowling ball, former college football player, pretty strong wrestler, and that's what he does. He comes in there and he wrestles. On the feet, Finny has not a lot to offer. If he gets stuck at range with people, Finny is going to get teed off on. His cardio, for the pace he pushes, his cardio is pretty good, in my opinion. We have seen him get tired in round 3, but he doesn't tend to stop working, which I like to see. And the fact that he's a volume wrestler, I really like to see at 185 pounds. So Finny is a prospect. I don't think he's got like a championship ceiling or anything like that, but a guy who can land 6, 7, 8, 9 takedowns at middleweight is going to win a lot of fights in the UFC, in my opinion. But he's taking on Valentine here, and it's a pretty interesting fight. On the one hand, my assessment of Valentine going into the Loader fight was he had bad hips. He was easy to take down. And if he didn't catch a sub, he was likely to get controlled and or gas. And that view hasn't changed for me really at all. And so I think Finny should get takedowns here. Having said that, I do think Valentine is like a sneaky, dangerous fighter. His jiu-jitsu is far from conventional, and it's not what I would call good, but it's dangerous, and it's the kind of jiu-jitsu and kind of grappling that fighters don't train for. So seasoned grapplers will deal with Valentine with very, very little issue, but unseasoned guys can get caught in stupid shit, and I kind of feel like that's the dynamic in this fight. It's like, can Valentine catch him on the feet and knock him out? He can, but Finny is pretty risk off on the feet, and he times his entries pretty well. And then can Valentine sweep him or put him in something funky on the ground and sub him? And I do think that can happen. I think the first round of this fight could be somewhat sweaty for Finny, potentially, if he isn't able to get to a dominant half guard position or something like that. But I do think post the first round, Finny should really take over this fight, and the takedown should come easier and the control should come easier. I guess ultimately, I think the line is probably fine. Finny, I project to get a fair amount of takedowns in this fight. I think he'll get a fair amount of control, but I think Valentine's live to finish him early in the fight. So we'll see how it goes, but I lean Finny. It should be a fun one, though. Next up, we got Gerald Mirshark taking on Brad Tavvaris. Weird fight and kind of surprising. This one has never happened before. Current price on Mirshark, minus 260. The comeback on Tavvaris, plus 220. I'm sorry. Current price on Tavvaris, minus 260. The comeback on Mirshark, plus 220. I actually considered parlaying this with Barbosa, and I considered laying the price on Mirshark straight, and I still have, or not Mirshark again. Sorry, Tavvaris. I don't know why I keep referring to Mirshark as the favorite. I feel like this is just a question: is how shot is Brad Tavvaris? Because Mirshark really should have very, very little standing success in this fight. It's possible that him being a southpaw will open up, more opportunities here for the body kick, and Brad's calf kicks won't be nearly as effective. But I mean, even in the boxing, the difference between these two is just gigantic. In hardware, I think the difference in durability is gigantic. I think the difference in cardio is also gigantic. At Mirshark, obviously his best bet here is getting a submission, but Brad Tavvaris is one of the best submission grappler or defensive grapplers in the history of the division. He's almost impossible to take down. He's virtually impossible to hold down. We saw him fight Antonio Carlos Jr., who's both a better wrestler, and you can make an argument, or not even an argument, is a better submission grappler than Gerald Mirshark, and he had basically no success trying to grapple Tavvaris. So I really have a hard time picturing a Tavvaris win that isn't him landing a big KO, and Tavvaris Mirshark doesn't have that many KOs in his career. So I think it should be wider. I feel like Mirshark, this price being short on the Mirshark side, requires Tavvaris to either be just totally and completely washed, or for Tavvaris to make some very, very bad low IQ decisions. I actually agree with the take from Leo. Mirshark has had some decent kickboxing performances. And actually, if you were to look at their distance metrics, they are actually pretty close, Mirshark and Tavvaris. For me, I just feel like the hand speed and the power of Tavvaris is just a lot different than Mirshark. But yeah, I lean the Brad side here. I don't know if I'll get there to a play. Laying minus 260 on Brad Tavvaris never feels good. But I do think this, it feels like this is one of the softest matchups they could give Brad in the division at this point. And if he can't capitalize on this, he should probably retire. To be honest, he should probably retire anyway, but he's not. So here we are. Moving on, we got Kennedy Inchukwu. He's taking on Martin Budai. Current price, Kennedy minus 300. The comeback on Budai plus 250. I've been going back and forth on this one a bit. I had very mixed feelings after taping it. On the one hand, I feel stylistically it's very, very favorable for Kennedy. You know, Budai is a very poor distance striker. He doesn't throw high volume. He's easy to get off on. He's easy to hit. The way Budai likes to fight is to push you into the clinch and just try to hold you there and kind of beat you up there. But I actually think Kennedy is a much better clinch fighter than Budai is, which is, you know, if that's the case, you know, where does Budai have much upside here? Because then you factor in the fact that Budai doesn't have all that much power. But the more I think about it, I'm also like, Kennedy's been hurt and knocked out a few amount of times, a concerning amount of times. You know, Budai he's not powerful, but he can hurt guys, and he can certainly hurt Kennedy. Even in the clinch, while I think Kennedy has a nastier clinch game, you know, he's fighting a much bigger man than Budai. Kennedy was just fighting at 205, so I keep thinking, like, well, what if Budai can just keep him there, and it turns out Kennedy can't get out of there because he's bigger. The grappling, I'd be surprised if Budai could get him down and hold him down, but we haven't really seen too much of Kennedy on bottom like in recent years. So maybe he could. And again, you're talking about a former light heavyweight taking on a heavyweight. And then you couple that with a bunch of really lackluster performances we've seen from Kennedy over the years, including the cherry on top being the Oven State Peru performance, where it is hard to understand how he lost a decision at altitude to Oven St. Peru, but it happened. I'm not interested in betting Budai here at plus 250, but my initial, I do think the line could be potentially wide here, and I think it's possible Budai is just too much of a heavyweight for Kennedy. The truth is he hasn't really, you know, he's looked good since joining the heavyweight division, obviously, but he hasn't really been testing himself at physical heavyweights, you know. Lucas Brzezinski, terrible. Like, one of the worst to do it, easy to hurt. Chris Burnett, literally the worst heavyweight to do it. So, I don't know. I don't think this is like necessarily that easy for Kennedy because now he's fighting a real heavyweight who's actually physical. But I do think he's the better fighter. I think he should win this fight. I really, honestly, if not for Budai's fight with, oh God, who's the Russian he fought last fight? Gaziev? I probably would have more interest in him here, but I felt like Budai basically checked out the moment he realized he couldn't just push him against the fence and he was going to eat shots. And to me, that's a pretty bad sign in a fight here where he probably won't get free clinch time. So, yeah, I mean, Kennedy should win, but no interest. Moving on, we got Cortavius Romeus taking on Chang Ho Lee. Current price, Lee's a small favorite. It is minus 146 Lee. Comeback is plus 126 on Romeus. I took 2 units on Romeus at plus 150 a bit earlier today. I am not a huge Cortavius Romeus fan, and I made a terrible bet on him in his first fight at Juice, and that was not fun. I still, though, look at this fight, and I think, again, it's a favorable fight for him. You know, Chang Ho Lee, he has a good process. I'll give him that. High work rate. He tries to push the grappling. Very, very, very heavy. And, you know, he's had some success with it overseas and in the Far East. On the feet, he doesn't really want to strike with you at range. He's got no defense. He's very easy to hit, but he does try to clinch you up and just strike with you out of the clinch. And, you know, I got to give him credit. You know, one of the best ways to win fights in MMA is to push a very high pace, attempt a lot of takedowns, and attempt a lot of strikes. You know, that's how guys win fights usually, or win decisions usually. The problem I see on the Chang Ho Lee side is just, I think he lacks physicality really for this level. I look at, and on top of that, he's a grappler who I don't think is that good at grappling. You know, you watch his semifinal match in Road to UFC, and he was getting mauled for most of the fight. And then his opponent gassed out horribly in round 3, and he kind of finished him for top position. You watch his fight with Long Zhao, and he basically won the fight via just clinching up and beating him up with knees to the body. And they just fought in the clinch, both of them, the entire fight. And frankly, he was fortunate to get that decision, and he didn't look great on bottom there either. And now he takes on Cortavius Romeus, and he's never fought an athlete like Romeus before. Romeus, he's got a lot of issues. He can be a bit hittable. He's been knocked out before. He makes absolutely terrible decisions in the cage. I almost had a stroke when he jumped for that armbar in round 1 against Bolanos off his first takedown. Yeah, so he's got issues. Like I'm not a huge fan of Cortavius Romeus. I think he's more of an athlete than anything else, but he is a good wrestler. He's got, I wouldn't even say an okay submission game. He's got a submission game, and he's very fast and he hits very, very hard. But I kept thinking about this fight, and like, where is Chang Ho Lee going to have success? Can Lee push a pace on him, clinch him up, and push a hard enough pace for Romeus to break down the stretch? He could, yeah. I think that's the case for Lee here. But I don't really think Lee's going to be able to clinch Romeus up. And that's kind of my issue with the fight. I feel Romeus is just way too strong, way too fast, way too athletic for that. I don't think he'll be able to take him down. I think if Romeus is smart, he should just keep the fight at distance and strike with him, because I just think he's much faster and much bigger hitter. But, I see people mentioning the Imperato fight in the chat, but I honestly don't think Michael Imperato is a much worse fighter, if at all, than Chang Ho Lee is. Lee really should not have much for him on the feet here. Yeah, maybe he can clinch him up and drag him into deep waters, but I keep thinking if Lee is that insistent on forcing the grappling, there's a decent chance Romeus is just going to counter grapple him into top position all fight and just win the fight that way. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. How many times do we have to see these Far East grapplers come over to the UFC and look really bad when they get here and they fight guys that actually know how to grapple and wrestle? And I look at Chang Ho Lee, who's getting out physical by guys like Long Zhao, by the guy not Swapiso he fought in the semifinals and road to UFC. And I just can't picture him coming in here, tying up Lee. You're right. Pepe said I should stop comparing him to Imperato. I shouldn't insult Imperato like that. He's right about that. But, I just can't really picture Lee tying Romeus up for 15 minutes. I feel like if that happens, it probably means Romeus is getting into top position. And if they're at range, I think Romeus is going to land on him at will. And the other thing is the power dynamic in this fight makes me think it's going to be very, very hard for Lee to take the front foot here. And if he can't put Romeus on the back foot, I don't think he can strike with Romeus unless he just clips him with something. But I think he's going to get bombed on pretty hard. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of make it pick him to slight favor Romeus. The real concern here is just Romeus' IQ and his cardio, because, if Lee is still there and still coming forward after 8 minutes, it could get sweaty. But I just feel like there's a lot more finishing upside for Romeus here. I think he's got more moment upside. I think he's the better grappler. And I think he's just a much, much better athlete. So I took Romeus. We'll see what happens with it. But that's probably my favorite spot on the card, honestly, thus far anyway. We'll see where the other lines move, including this one. We got Joe Anderson Breurto taking on Pat Sabatini. Current price, Breurto minus 210. The comeback on Sabatini plus 180. I am really torn here, because on the one hand, Pat Sabatini, in my opinion, is a much better grappler than Joe Anderson Breurto. And if he can get takedowns here, I think he'll probably control Breurto for very, very long stretches of this fight. I watched the way Breurto reacted to being put on bottom against Jonathan Pierce, and the way he reacted when he got reversed by William Gomes. And, Pat's a much better grappler than either of those guys. And it just makes me feel like if Pat gets on top, he's not going to get up. So, I mean, a lot of upside with that dynamic for Pat here. And he's probably got a cardio edge. But, again, and kind of similar to the last fight I just talked about, Pat needs to get him down. On the feet, the difference in hardware here is just absolutely crazy. And, Pat knows, I think, his own fragility and his own flaws. And the last time we saw him fight, a real major hitter was Diego Lopes. And we saw Pat, he did not get aggressive, go in there and try to take him down. He tried to play the distance game and then got knocked out. And if that happened, I could see it happen here where Breurto goes forward and Pat's just trying to time a takedown while Breurto bombs on him and knocks him out. I can easily see that happening here. So it's a weird dynamic, because obviously the upside here on the feet is all with Breurto. He's got a fair amount of KO upside in this fight. And the thing is, I don't really think Pat is like super likely to sub Breurto, even if he gets the grappling going. So Pat's going to have to probably avoid the death exchange for anywhere between 4 to 7 minutes in this fight, which is pretty scary against a guy like Breurto. But having said that, yeah, I mean, look, like Dravi just said this, and this is something I noticed. Breurto, every time he gets someone attempts to grapple him, he does not sprawl. He doesn't stuff the head. He just attacks chokes. And if he does that to Pat, I feel he is going to get put on the mat here pretty easily. It's just a question of whether or not Pat is, comfortable, going forward and trying to grapple him here. Pat sub could be interesting because it's probably going to be a big number, to be honest, because Breurto, I don't believe he's ever been subbed. But I do think Pat's the side. Like, Breurto's upside is a KO, but I think it's very, very hard to put Breurto KO north of like 40%, Now, he could win a decision off moments. I could kind of see it. But it's kind of hard to get to this number, to get to the minus 210 with Breurto when he's giving away this kind of a grappling disadvantage. And we've seen Breurto on bottom. We saw, and like, look, I love Bill Algeo, fun fighter. But, we saw Bill Algeo have a lot of grappling success against Joe Anderson Breurto. Pat's just different level. So, yeah, I mean, I lean Pat. I'm probably going to bet him. I'm kind of hoping it gets bet back up, though. Pat, unfortunately, I passed on, the best Pat spot, which was the dog play against Jonathan Pierce. But I think he has a shot here. I think he has a very, very real shot. If he can just avoid, getting into big engagements with Breurto and waiting for Breurto to get over aggressive, I think he can win this fight comfortably. So we'll see what happens, but I'm excited for it. And then we got the main event. We got Lerone Murphy. He's taking on Josh Emmett. Current price, Murphy minus 330. The comeback on Emmett is plus 270. I am pretty tempted to bet Josh Emmett here. I have a lot of concerns. First and foremost, which being his age. But having said that, I mean, this is a huge number. I know Murphy's good, and I'm a fan of Murphy. I'm a fan of where he's going. Yeah, Liam's saying unders and violence, and I kind of like that idea as well here. I think that captures most of the Emmett age equity, to be honest. But, Murphy's been cracked and hurt in a bunch of fights, man. By three or four different guys. And I don't think, now he's dealing with the hardest hitter he's ever faced. And like Emmett's old, he looked horrible against Topuria, but I mean, Ilia Topuria is maybe the best pound for pound fighter in the UFC. So is anyone really punishing him for that? Obviously, he knocked out Bryce Mitchell cold, and he may just be washed here. Like, it's possible Murphy just runs through him, but Murphy is going to scrap with him. He's going to come out and he's going to strike with him. And Emmett is nasty on the counter. And Emmett also, one of the big things in this matchup, I think, that benefits him is Emmett's power tends to suppress volume in a big way, which I think could make it harder for Murphy to win minutes than it usually is. So, like, I wouldn't be shocked if Emmett is a bit more minute competitive than the market thinks here. I think he's got some KO equity. I think Murphy has a fair amount of KO equity himself. And I don't really see, unless Emmett is just turbo shot, I don't see a ton of grappling upside for Murphy here. Emmett's a pretty good wrestler. He comes from a wrestling gym. He comes from that background. I feel he should mostly be able to keep this fight on the feet. And I don't think he's going to have, you watch Murphy's main event with Edson Barbosa, and he pressured him relentlessly in that fight. You could tell by round 2, he had zero fear of what was coming back at him from Edson. I don't think that's going to be the case here. I think Emmett's going to get plenty of chances to pick his shots and pick his counters. So, yeah, I mean, I favor Murphy. Murphy's probably a top 5 to 8 guy at this point. He might fight for a title soon. He's a good fighter, very well-rounded. But he can get cracked, and he's going to scrap with Emmett a bit here. And at the end of the day, Josh Emmett's got the kind of power that it's kind of hard for anyone to ever be, minus 300 against him unless they can just absolutely maul him on the mat. And I don't really think Murphy can do that. So I'll probably take a shot on the big dog in the main event again this week, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, guys, apologies. It was just me tonight. Kind of threw me off my game a bit. So sorry if I was kind of drifting off at times, trying to keep the train on the tracks. But I appreciate you guys all coming out tonight. Congrats to Toddles, I believe is his name, who won our parlay game last week. Lag sent him $200. We'll run another one for the pay-per-view next week. We'll also get a guest for the pay-per-view. Lags is on that. And guys, if you like the show, drop a like, subscribe. We'd appreciate it. And we'll see you back here next week, 7 p.m. on Sunday to chat. Huge pay-per-view. Alex Volkanovski, Diego Lopes. It's a banger. We'll see you then. Peace.